Hello YouTube. Wanted to talk today a little bit about Open Policy Agent. More specifically, wanted to talk about policy as code. So this is the idea that we can test our units, right? So unit functional, we can test component. That's testing from the development perspective. Then there's security testing. When I think of security testing, I think of SAST, so full access to the source, but with a security focus. And I think Open Policy Agent and policy as code has maybe a foot in both worlds. What do I mean by that? I think we can use Open Policy Agent and its language that it's written in, which is Rego, to do this testing. So these tests are separated, the policy, from the implementation of the tests, stuff that's written in Rego, which we'll see here in a minute. And I think that makes things a little bit easier, right? So you can have an architect type person doing the definition of the testing, and then you can have the developers writing the tests, and this test suite then can be applied to a range of different services, architectures, whatever these would be called, right? So the big one, obviously Kubernetes, Docker containers, but in my case, I'm using it to test Terraform. And specifically, I'm using it with Azure. So what I've got here is my trusty dev container that my last video was about. And I've gone ahead and run my script. I have a script here that installs my Azure framework, right? So it puts in the CLI tool and kind of gets things ready for me to work in an Azure environment. What I would like to show next is the Open Policy Agent website has examples for each of these paradigms, in my case Terraform. So what I've done is taken these test steps, converted them from AWS to Azure, solely for the reason that my team right now is doing a lot with Azure, and just to demonstrate the capability of running this stuff. So the test OPA script here, this is a shell script, and then it's got some conversions, we'll say, from AWS to Azure, as I mentioned. And it's going to create a policy file. This here is what Rego is what it looks like. But just to show that it works. The shell script, mildly interesting. It's kind of a rehash of what they have already, even though it's Azure. More interesting, I think, was I discovered that terrascan was a project that allows folks to scan Terraform files, but it also acts as a front end OPA. So inside the container, because of, I don't know, file system boundaries or something, you have to run it as sudo or do as in my case. So I'm not going to make you sit through the init command. Suffice it to say, once you do terrascan init, you can then do terrascan scan. Real quick before I do that, just to give the flavor of what's happening here, I have a simple main.tf for Azure. I'm gonna that real quick, and essentially it just calls our own VNet module and sets up a few subnets inside our resource group. Okay, that's Azure speak for we have a big administrative domain, and we're going to set up some subnets, 3 subnets inside the virtual network. Okay, so that's my very simple Terraform. Back to the point at hand. With these things in place, what I want to demonstrate here is that I can do a terrascan scan, and I find this very interesting. So what it's telling me is, hey, we scanned the thing, like you said, and you don't have security groups attached to your virtual subnet, virtual network subnet here in the module that we called. Fair enough. What I learned from this is that terrascan comes with a set of 562. See, we have 561 here plus one we just violated. 562 OPA policy as code tests, right? So canned test cases come with terrascan. So when I do that terrascan init, what's happening is it's cloning git clone, or yeah, do a git clone of the repo, and that's where this stuff lives in my .terrascan directory in my home directory. So the interesting thing about this is what we're actually developing is modules, Terraform modules for the VM series firewalls from Palo Alto. So essentially, this is a false positive because when we're creating this module, we don't want to trigger on missing network security group. The module is, I guess, what's the word for it? The integrity of the module is such that the subnet is outside, right? That would be something declared in main.tf. The module gets called, and that security group comes from somewhere else. Okay, it's not a piece of the module specifically. So the nice thing about this is that .terrascan directory I mentioned, you can go in and alter the thing, right? The set of canned policies written in Rego that come with. Okay, this is a good result, and I spent some time driving people nuts with developers who are committing their stuff, and I'm going, well, check out this, I ran this scan and here's the results. And so there was this sense that things were sort of not quite right, but the capability to alter these, to tailor these to our needs is there. So very good tool, easy to set up, good result. I evaluated several tools, this against things like HashiCorp Sentinel, which was pretty complicated, and it felt like a bit of a vendor lock-in. So I wound up focusing on this more open source solution. Okay. So that's terrascan. So I saw an architect do a demo where he took some YAML, fed it into a decoder to generate some Terraform, get another piece of YAML with OPA policy. All this stuff sort of dovetailed nicely. GitHub action. And when the action ran, he would uncommenting pieces of the policy, and then against the Terraform that he generated, it would start to trigger these policies that he created. And pretty sure he used this tool to generate stuff. I thought this is a pretty interesting thing here if you want to do syntax and test things out, but that's not the way personally I learn. Here I have some test cases that I wrote in this Rego language. I felt like I could learn it better if I were to sort of experiment with it myself. So in typical fashion, I create a README file for myself so I can come back later, find, resume where I left off. The way this works is you do a Terraform plan, you convert that plan to JSON, and then you can run your test cases against the JSON file. I think I already have the files created. Yeah, so there's my plan. Again, I have, I think, just a simple, let's look at the main real quick. Oh, this one is Terraform 14. So, okay, I'll switch my Terraform from 12 to 14, but essentially, we will create a resource group and then do some tests on that. Very simple setup, right? Great. So let's skip ahead. So OPA, we want to try running. I made 2 test cases. The one test case is location. So this is Rego. And what I said was, I'm allowing 2 locations, North Pole and misspelled Central Australia. Okay. Oh, I think I misspelled that on purpose to cause a failure. And if there's a failure, it's going to give us this deny reason. Okay. So this is the location test. Right now we have North Europe in the plan, and it's not one of the allowed locations, so we get a deny. This sort of JSON output would be good for testing because we can evaluate it programmatically, right? So, see now, if I were to edit the test, and let's say I were to make, oops. Got it. Okay. If I were to make North Europe an allowed location, the deny is no longer triggered because North Europe is now in our list of allowed locations. And there's also a tags test case. So what I've done is create a test case that checks the plan for tags. So for example, let's say I wanted to create a GitHub action that ensured that your PR, when you created a certain resource, contained a certain tag like test or dev. So something like this. So I was requiring a tag called test it, and because the test it tag did not exist in the TF plan, we got a deny. So the policy is to deny if there's no test it tag. We have a test tag, an environment tag of type test. We could also alter this to pass in a similar manner to what we just did for location test. I think this is a very powerful result. I think that if you were to create a suite tailored to your workflow, or even require that developers adding pieces to a Terraform module, for instance, submitted along with their work new test cases, including unit, functional, and policy tests, you could wind up with a pretty decent test suite pretty quickly. Yeah, just that. I think, I'd be interested to hear anyone else who's using this, maybe in a different way. I think this stuff's fairly new still. Not the only thing we're using to test, but I think this is enough for one video. So thanks for watching.